especially from
What do you mean
teams
gone?
that
It was
have
in
that.
He's
all
not
three
gone yet,
games
and
that
people are
your
still
team
Shut
just
up,
played
He's
today.
gone. No, those teams are. That's why some of those teams go home now. Is because they don't understand that. Everyone has learned. We've all learned. No Yone.
Hello and welcome to The Dive, driven by Kia, Season 8, Episode 32. We are all remote from our hotels after the last game has
Drakos'
just
hotel's
been...
looking nice.
Yeah, actually...
Drakos' hotel is his home in Berlin, but a hotel's close enough, you know? I'm really just a guest here.
well, you are the star guest of this episode. So
Hooray!
Wow.
Congratulations.
What a great day to come in on. Nothing embarrassing at all happened in my region today. Totally normal, average day.
Actually, we
Average
just...
Worlds for Mad Lions, yeah. You know?
we just finished the draw, and Mad Lions was supposed to be the draw that TL got, but for some reason Gam was there. What happened?
Wow. Do I go with the Cope angle or do I go with the... You know what, actually? All I'll say, I'm kind of glad they lost to Gam because that's embarrassing, but that's embarrassing in a way that, like, we can live down. But if they had lost to TL and TL was, like, the headhunter of LEC teams this year, that shit would never go away. We'd hear about it for 30 gajillion years.
Yeah,
Wait,
you know what I mean?
losing to GAM is less bad than losing to TL?
No, because we don't have like a regional rivalry. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, it's more embarrassing, but it only will matter if MD. It's more embarrassing for MDK in isolation. It's less embarrassing for the LEC as a whole, as long as we send someone different next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mad always
It's
goes
kind
the
of
world.
cooked
follow
either
that.
way, but I'm really just trying to like rationalize it to myself to make the pain easier to get through.
So really,
you know?
it was a brilliant strategy by Mad Lions to get knocked out before they could run into an NA team.
Yeah, that or a really just absolute massive choke and total collapse. But yeah, sure, brilliant strategy. You know,
Well,
love that.
to join in with you a bit, 100 Thieves also took that strategy for us. You know, they decided
Who?
we're
was
gonna yeah.
Okay, but
But we're
already
only saying two
out.
teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem for us is,
Did you
is
hear?
that
America's we only have 2 seeds in the new system.
the thing is, no one, like, 100 Thieves were the team that was like, everyone knew they were never supposed to be here. It was a miraculous upset versus C9. Like, I feel like anyone who wants to shit on 100 Thieves is kind of trolling because, like, they earned it and they got that crazy upset to get here over C9, right? So it's like, if you had crazy high expectations for 100 Thieves, I think you were already trolling. I think it is reasonable to expect that MDK, as up and down as they were throughout the year, would beat GAM. I think that is an okay assessment to make.
Don't you think they're kind of the same story though as 100 Thieves in a lot of ways, right? It's like 4 rookies and Yoya. Yeah, they started off really good, but then they had some horrible splits, and they got in through what a lot of people would say was a big upset over G2, right? That was kind of their qualification series. So to me, like in a lot of ways, they kind of had the similar story.
I think for me, what gave me hope is that while I looked at 100 Thieves and I think oversimplified, I would say it's like mostly River is obviously the player, and I think you could say the same mostly LA. Like Alvaro showed a lot of promise, and while Supa had some up and down games, he was solid too. And it felt like they were on a growth trajectory where they were really contesting teams, and they had really these shining moments. And like it wasn't the same as the C9 series, where I think a lot of people will look back and be like, C9 was like clowning in draft.
Yeah.
Like when they beat G2, they beat G2 in a lot of fights that felt like honest good fights, straight up draft, like not completely unwinnable from pick and ban. So it felt to me like it was a little bit more grounded. But if you look at it as like the holistic story of the year, I think it's fair to say they're probably closer than I would initially think about it. Just because you're right, it is a very similar like veteran leader surrounded kind of by rookie talent or up and coming talent.
Yeah. What did you think though about the series? Like honestly, right? Because obviously they did lose, but they came out in game number 1 and they super stomped them, and I was like, damn. Because I was thinking. Just straight up, I thought this was going to be a toss-up. I honestly didn't know who was going to win. I thought Mad was maybe favored, but like maybe 60-40 or something like that, like not like massively favored. And, you know, like they come out game number 1, they completely dominate them, and then they ended up losing back-to-back games.
Yeah, I was really caught off guard by especially how quickly, like game 2, you can chalk a little bit up to draft, right? I think the fact that Yone was not banned immediately across this entire series was really shocking to me in the context of the tournament thus far. But when he came into game 3 and it like really like the Nocturne pick came out and I looked at both drafts, I was like, damn, this is going to be like everything's going to be okay, you know? Like maybe it's a little bit rough,
And
it's a
you
little
guys
bit
had the Yone.
loosey-goosey. Yeah, but it's all going to come through in the end. And then it just kind of felt like this total collapse where even early on game we're just playing we're getting so much more. And that was the kind of moment where it felt over to me because I think that both our third and second seed, right, are like notoriously super, super emotional teams and super, super like, you know, obviously it's a big sports trope, esports trope to say they're momentum based, but they are definitely that kind of team. And so when they start losing early and like high stakes games, I'm already like ready to write them off because I've just seen that pattern so many times this year. So I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a good EU fan for this, but I was like pretty resigned. I was like, all right, yep, sucks. All right, we'll just pretend this will be our 100 Thieves things where you go, what do you talk about? What do you mean? Who is MDK? What that? No. I don't remember that team. We'll come back next year surely. But yeah, it was. I don't know. I wasn't impressed overall. I think there's a lot. They're so sloppy. Right, this is a team that like really did have good early to mid game macro, and I think they lost a lot of sight of that. And I honestly just think like individual players really underperformed. Mirwin and Frescowie had a terrible day. Felt like a huge regression for them in the context of Worlds. Like it should have been easy. They're playing on a stage they know. The meta shifted, but not by nearly as much as people expected. And Frescowie was a guy who was playing mages, even in the AD meta. Right, like they should have been set up for a much better position than they were. And none of that really showed through at all across this tournament and also in this series.
I did want to bring up Elyoya's interview afterwards because I thought it was really insightful, and he gave a really good answer talking about a topic that we've actually talked about a lot at the majority of international events. When he was talking about how they felt like they knew they could not win with their own style anymore because of scrims and being repeatedly beat down on them. And so they decided if we don't adjust now in this series, then even if we stuck to our style for this series and ended up winning, they feel like for sure they would lose the next one. And so they decided they're going to switch now and, you know, try and adapt to the meta and try and change. Whereas I feel like we generally, at least especially for the NA teams that usually come back saying kind of similar things, we usually come to the conclusion of like, well, we recommend like sticking with your own style, even if it hasn't been working. I would say probably a lot too, because not only is it like the thing you're more comfortable with, but also it's more fun to watch teams stick to their own style and then overcome what is, you know, an LPL or LCK kind of overruling meta versus try and like adapt to it and copy it and just like be weaker at it and kind of slower at it. What were your thoughts on that kind of interview and that perspective? Because you could tell like they really felt it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I think it's super crushing, right? And I don't want to take away anything from what I'm sure is just this horrendous weight on them, this feeling of failure. But for me, it's really tough because when are scrims real and when are scrims fake data, and it's like so hard to quantify. And I think that when you look at like their set pieces that are the most solid, Elyoya and Alvaro, in my eyes, it's like as long as they get to play what they want, I feel like everyone else should play comfort. And I think that maybe that's obviously without full context on the team, it's hard to say. But I just think that I just don't think it's realistic to feel like for most teams, and definitely for MDK, to feel like, hey, we're going to adapt to playing what is a much more rigid play style in a lot of ways, and also against teams that have been more stable in their practice the entire year, right? Like this is a team that's like very reliant on cheesing top lane picks for Mirwin to find success, for Frescowie to play like what is pretty standard meta. And while Yone is standard in the context of Worlds, like if he's not comfortable, I wouldn't want to put him on it. Like I want Frescowie and Mirwin, who have been very up and down, to be like in their most comfortable possible situations, so that Elyoya and kind of Alvaro are in a position where the map is as stable as possible. And I understand if you're getting smashed in scrims, like I get that feeling of nothing is working, something has to change. So I understand the perspective, but to me, it's like, sure, that's one of your options. It's not the option I would prefer ever, to the points that you made, Kobe, but it's also just, it's weird because it's also a little bit delusional. Like, Mirwin was cheesing all year and playing these range counter picks, and there were a lot of times where it didn't win them games and it looked bad. So, like, why was scrimming LCK and LPL teams the last straw? Why wasn't it the last straw when they were, like, face down in summer, barely qualifying, when, like, he was picking... Yeah, when he was, like, picking Nico top, getting 2K gold leads, and then fucking losing games. Like, so to me, it's like, yeah, I get it, but also... Did the, like, power of friendship convince you that this shit was gonna work? Like, it's like, it's a little bit, like, I understand it's a little bit delusional, but also when you're in that situation where you're losing everything, I don't think there is a right choice. So I'm not gonna say, like, shit. But I agree with you, Kobe. I would have preferred if they stuck to their guns there.
How many lane swaps were there in LEC? Like, did Mad deal with a lot of lane swaps, or were they normally in standard lanes when Mariner was picking his range top counterpick type stuff?
It was mostly standard lanes, right? Like, during the lane swap meta, they definitely suffered when it was more prevalent, and then obviously it kind of died out for us domestically. Was much more rare. BDS were one of those few teams kind of still throwing it out there, G2 on occasion. So the most recent split we had, it was much less prevalent, and so there is definitely a certain amount of, like, I don't think that was ever very much their strong suit, and certainly, yeah, like, Mirwin wanting to play any sort of cheesy top pick is significantly nerfed. Until you're 100, and like, unless the enemy top is also picking something that's going to suck in lane swaps, it's really hard for him to pick anything too crazy. But I do think there was more room for him in the context of this tournament to I would assume, based on, like, kind of the way he's practiced in the past, which is just super broad, big champion pool with a lot of niche counter picks, to do more. But maybe he just wasn't even practicing that stuff, and obviously you can't ask him on the day to, like, even though they did say they did it domestically on many occasions, I think, to, like, bust out some crazy range top laner or some really niche counterpick.
Yeah, because it seemed to me like Mirwin was getting completely rocked in the lane swaps. Like, both games 2 and 3, he was so far behind. You know, I think game 2, they had, I don't know if it was a miscommunication or what, but Ziggs TP'd bot, and then Gnar also TP'd bot, and then he just ended up having to recall from getting nothing. So it was just, you know, completely unnecessary TP, and doing it that early, like, TPing to the wrong lane, is so bad. He didn't end up getting as punished as game 3, where he TP'd in after his support died, and then he also died, and then it was actually just BG. He was down like 2k gold but at 14 or whatever. So to me, that seemed like, you know, maybe that's one of those things where I think lane swap is really hard when it comes to meta, because with a lot of these range tops, you know, if you want to play Nidalee top, or I don't know what other ones he plays, like Vayne or whatnot, it is really hard if you're just down 2-3 levels on everyone from a lane swap, right? And so you kind of are forced to adapt. But, you know, if you don't know how to do it properly, then the top laner is usually the one who suffers.
I also just think that, like, this is one of the things where rookie teams this year, like, there's always some team for either of our regions that manages to surprise with some number of rookies. But if lane swaps are ever a thing, rookies are so hard nerfed, because if all 5 people don't understand what they're supposed to be doing in a lane swap, like, something is always going to go a little bit wrong. And I think that, like, they were not one of our better lane swap teams. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of early deficits, like, occur because they're not ready to move around the map. For me, the bigger surprise was a lot of the individual misplays and mistakes and some of, like, the 1v1 situations, but that's completely fair. I don't know, like, how good their scrims looked or how comfortable they were. I don't want to say, like, they've always been terrible at lane swaps in the context of prep. Definitely wouldn't say they're one of our better lane swap teams, but some of the stuff that happened today, this play that you talked about especially, is like, that to me seems like a one-time miscommunication or fuck up, as opposed to, like, an indicator of, because that was really bad, right? Like, that to me that has to be an oopsie. Something had to have gone wrong in comms, or a misunderstanding of what their position was on the map. Don't know what it was.
I feel like they were largely the ones initiating the lane swaps, right? So I felt like they obviously seemed pretty confident that it would go well. To me, it was just, more than anything, I feel like their soul laners just weren't good at Worlds, right? And that's kind of like how it was at the end of the day. I thought Frescowy and Mirwin just weren't good. And the soul laners at the Worlds level are so good. and including Kiaya. Like people say, oh yeah, Kiaya is good, but I feel like the way people talk about him is he's good like for a minor region guy, but like I think he's better than almost every Western top laner at Worlds, right? Like he's probably not better than Broken Blade, but I think he's better than like pretty much everyone else. I mean, like I wouldn't have said he's better than Impact, but Impact has been horrible at Worlds. So I think he's better than any of our top laners, and I think he's better than all your top laners except Broken Blade. He's actually just really, really good. So to me, I do think he is always going to be a problem, and I think he's like the biggest problem that teams have to kind of solve for when you're playing against GAM. And it's just kind of unfortunate that like their strongest player, to me by a lot, was matching up against probably your worst performing player on the team.
I don't know. I think Fresco had a run. Like I think when you go up in a lane matchup against Emo, who I think is like the weakest player on GAM by a pretty decent margin, and probably one of the weakest mid laners in this tournament, like you need to be able to do more. And even when he was fed on Ahri, like him not being able to have that impact, so many charms missing, right? Like that's super unfortunate, because that's an opportunity for you to really overperform and step up and carry the team, and he kind of missed out there. And so to me, Mirwin was on the kind of the narrative throughout the year for most of how we kind of looked at Mirwin was like, if he has the counter pick, he's a solid player. If it comes to playing conventional matchups, he's always going to be a little bit worse off. It was never as bad as it was like in this tournament, for sure. And I think a lot of it is because obviously Kiaya was a monster. But for me, Frescowi, like, it was brutal. And the solo lane COD is completely correct. Like, I think this is the thing for MDK that has been rough multiple times throughout the year. And like, but I think for MDK fans, they're probably surprised by how bad it was at the very end.
Yeah,
absolutely. What did you guys think about GAM swapping out their coach mid-series? I don't think I've ever seen that. After game one, they were like, yeah, there's going to be a substitution. Our strategic coach is getting replaced.
Yeah.
And to their credit, they did end up winning after that. But I just thought that was such a weird thing. When I heard that, I was like, who does that?
I was really
so
confused
random.
as well. Like, we were kind of memeing it, right? Like in the cast, because we don't really know why it's happening or anything. So like Flowers announced that, and I was like, makes sense. They forgot to ban Yone last game, right? Like, coach gets subbed out after that one.
You understand? I was watching with other people. We were not like locked in on the audio of what was. I didn't know that happened.
Yeah, after game number one, that was like the announcement of her. So Flowers says it on broadcast. I was like, yeah, well, they let Yone through on red side. They didn't ban it. Makes sense, haha, right? Because I don't know why he was subbed out. Maybe it was just something like the guy wasn't feeling well, or there's something else going on. So someone's just taking his place on stage. Because you can have like only so many coaches on stage for during the draft, but I got no clue like what, if anything, that means. It might be completely unrelated to anything to do with the game, or it might be like, this guy wasn't doing a good job, let's get him out of here. So who knows?
I'm pretty sure it's just the stage presence, because you can have like multiple people in the back and
yeah,
stuff
of course,
too.
yeah.
So yeah, they could still have input, but it was funny. And then Yone
just during draft, right? You can't have more input during draft.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, in general though, I did agree with like the strategy, and we even recommended it like on the analyst test. We're like, yeah, you should lane swap versus GAM, because lane swaps are one of the best ways to try and get the best players of GAM behind, because top laners are generally going to be weaker, and Kiaya and Levi have been the big performers there. So it was just to me, it was misexecution, honestly. Mad, coach even kind of talking about, draft wasn't everything. And so, yeah, I agree. It's like there's draft things to look at, but in the end of the day, there's also execution stuff. And you mentioned some of the lane swaps.
Game 3 was crazy.
Game 3, when the support is by himself under there and gets dove, and the teleport is late from the top laner. Like, the whole point of that lane swap is to have both of them under there to try and defend the tower dive. And so when the teleport was late, I was like, oh God, this is going to be so hard to come back from, because you're doing this lane swap to try and get Kiaya behind, and then Kiaya comes out way ahead on Aurora, which is already like shown that he's a master of. It is a super strong champion right now. I was like, sorry guys, I think you're cooked. And they got cooked, but there's a lot of stuff to go over. We should probably move on to the TL series that was right after that, because that was one. Then we were in the position, the NA representatives, of like, okay, now we are starting to get really worried, because we're also seeing some plays that, of course, when you watch your own teams, you're always looking at the negative plays and like the fail plays, I guess, the mechanic errors, but they also really stood out to us, both on the desk and even when in the cast. I could hear you guys and you're like, what is going on? Impact. We're so used to relying on you, and he's not performing well. And then it's just they were able to clutch it out, of course. So obviously a much better outcome. I put so much praise onto Yone for the whole series. So Yone was the big savior of TL today, and I feel like kind of bought them some more time in the tournament to what I feel like is just more time to get back to what they were already showing pre-Worlds, because I honestly feel like this whole Worlds tournament so far has been way below expectations of what TL have really been building on this whole year, where they've just been performing so well at every turn. And then you have a little bit of a rocky finals versus FlyQuest, you get upset there, and then the tournament so far is not going well. So I'm hoping the next few days for TL are some good opportunities for them to really lock in.
I mean, it's been a bit of a weird Worlds, because obviously they were in winning positions against both LNG and Weibo, right? And they showed, I think, a lot of strengths in those series. So I think even though they had some big kind of fail moments in those games, I think people were kind of coming away from it looking at well, but you showed you could compete. You showed you could actually beat those teams. You're actually close to beating those teams if you didn't have some kind of fall on your face moments, which obviously suck, but those can kind of be attributed to nerves or whatever. But this series to me was way worse than their losses. They 2-0-1, but their decision making was really bad in some cases. I've watched every single Impact game that he's played for a decade straight now. This is the worst I've ever seen him play, ever. He was awful. He just was not only was he not a non-factor, he was actually actively making their chances worse to win the game. It was crazy. And he is usually so good in these situations where if something goes bad early, he usually is so good at stabilizing those matchups and being able to contribute in a big way. And so it was kind of shocking to me. I mean, he didn't play good in some of the other series. I know there was the early Renekton solo kill where he got solo killed in one of those, but it's against a top laner that you're not really expecting him to get beat down by, in Weiser, where the first game, I mean, I've just never really been that big of a fan of Impact on Jax. He obviously can play the champion, but I've always felt like he can just do way more on tanks and knows how to play from behind and knows how to have a huge impact in team fights. But that Jax game was crazy. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but maybe a 35-minute game or something like that. He did 4,000 damage. He did the same damage, or I think a couple hundred more than the Rel and the Alistar. He literally had no impact on the entire game. And then in the next game, in the Gnar game, his early lane went fine, but he was just killing himself in side lanes over and over, and not a single time in the whole game did he show up to a team fight with his Gnar bar at the correct spot. He was, every single time he'd already have begged out and come with an exhausted bar and no rage. And I don't think he had a single decent Gnar ult the entire game. It was just weird. It was I was watching a different player. I honestly couldn't believe it. Even that tier 2 push where they were trading Dragon for tier 2, and then he greeds and stays after the whole team bases and hops in place to try to get the attack speed buff and kill the tower in front of 2 people and then just dies. I was like, what is going on?
Are you guys worried now? Because I feel for me that when I looked at this tournament, I was TLG2, these are the Western reps I can touch or trust. Everyone else, freaking coin flip. We'll kind of see what we get. And in those first 2 games, to your point, I really did feel they're in a good spot. I think we were talking about this, right? I think APA could have done more in the Syndra game. I think that they were already in a tough spot before they kind of whiffed Nico ult from APA in the first place, because they had kind of fucked up their setup around Herald. But they were it was still an okay game, right? But you come into this game and you start seeing uncharacteristic performances from a guy. If Core or Impact start shaking or start looking shaky on stage, I'm instantly wait a second. You're not allowed to do that. Everyone else is allowed to choke it up a little bit. Everyone else in the team is allowed to screw around. You two need to be good. And they had and the Core has been really good. The Core Nami game when they're playing Nami Lucian was really good. So now I'm super nervous, because I think TL being good on the map, TL being good at lane swaps, that all falls apart if one piece, and especially if a top laner isn't performing, right?
Yeah, I mean, as Isaac immediately reacted, we are very nervous now, and it's because this year, this summer, I feel like all of us have had the most hope and most belief in our teams that we're sending to Worlds in a long time. There was the first kind of wobble to that where the whole summer we thought it was going to be a lock of TL, FlyQuest, and Cloud9. And we were like, all right, sweet. We are feeling really good. 3 sick reps. Like, Worlds this year is going to be amazing. And Team Liquid have spent this whole year, good performances at MSI, really hopeful performances at EWC also, and like keep getting close to beating T1. And, we're just building up so much faith. I honestly had become accustomed to coming into international events with less expectations, and then this year I'm like, so primed for it. That's why I think I am so nervous now, and so looking at every possible mistake and every possible opportunity. They're still doing a lot of good things, and you can still see a lot of the good choices and things that really got them here. So that's why I'm still optimistic for our small little break that we're getting here, and the fact that they've bought themselves some more time, and they are best of series from here on out. But I think the expectations got really high.
What do you think, Meteos?
Draw's good at least. That's all I'll say. Draw's good at least. As far
True.
as,
Yeah, I don't know. I always feel like that guy, the guy from the meme where he's like in the gallows saying first time when I see NA internationally, because I just always have no expectations, because it seems like every year there is new hope saying like this is going to be our year or whatnot. And then it's just like, I don't know, the Eastern teams are so good. I don't know how they're going to lose to us. So I'm usually not expecting a whole lot. I will say I think TL's been playing below their level. I think they've been kind of our consistent team, and they are making some uncharacteristic mistakes. It doesn't feel like they're just getting outplayed by a team that's better than them. They're just doing some really weird things and losing off of it. So that's kind of disappointing to see. But I'm not super tied up with the result, because I just recognize it's so unlikely to actually be able to beat these teams that as long as they play well, that's kind of enough for me. Like, as long as they put up a fight.
Didn't you think that after, I mean, I didn't watch the DWC series, but everyone's telling me that, it was 2-1 and it was like a throw from TL, it was close. But the MSI series as well, it's like they're taking games off of T1, and when T1 was even playing better, going into that and stuff, and it's like you're almost winning a series where you do have these mistakes, you do have these throws. So to me, it's like that's what made me excited. It's like that you're actually showing, you're not just showing that you can beat Fnatic, you're showing that you can actually compete against an LPL or an LCK team. And I feel like in these games as well, like you said, they're making some uncharacteristic mistakes. It's like, I was watching back some of the games. I mean, the Syndra game, I think API could have played a lot of things differently. I felt like for sure he should have been playing with his team, with the CC, instead of marking Gnar, who was like the only person in the game he couldn't kill. I felt like, I think it was the second game. I think it was a Weibo game where they died to 2 ganks from Tarzan on the Skarner without flashing Skarner E. And it's like, those are just like basic mistakes, right? That we haven't seen TL literally make the entire year. So to me, it's like they can beat these teams. Like, I feel like they showed that they can beat these teams. So that's where I do get expectations, because it's like, to me, we get excited for our teams, and like, we're fans. I'm going to be excited for my teams. I'm going to have hope. But this is the most excited I've been for a team since literally 2016. Like, it's been a long time for me that I actually had real belief that a team, could play at that level. I'm always going to have hope, and I'm always going to talk about the ways that I think our teams could do it. But like, I felt like TL was on the level of the lower tier LPL and LCK teams, and that not getting top 8 is a disappointment, right? And that's kind of how I was looking at it, where honestly, I haven't had real expectations that we're going to make it into quarters for a long time.
Yeah,
and
I think that's totally fair, for sure. I think, I don't know, I've gone through this roller coaster of having high hopes and then getting sourly disappointed so many times that I don't know. I keep my expectations completely bottomed out for any of these tournaments. It's like, you know, we lose in play-ins. That's just too bad, man. Like, happens. But yeah, obviously I really want them to do well. I'm glad they won today, but it was even interesting in Core's interview after the games. He was saying, you know, his personality is so funny because it's just so dry. They're like, you know, these games haven't been going your way. He's like, yeah, you know, just our hands aren't working. Like, they recognize they're literally just playing bad for whatever reason. So, yeah, it sucks. I mean, maybe they can turn it around. It has happened before, but we'll see.
Yeah, to me, I would say like NA fans can kind of have the like minor takeaway and minor win of at least to the thing that you kind of touched on earlier, Meteos. In the past, you feel like, oh, the teams that we're playing are just way better than us and they're stomping us. But in at least these games, even though they're losing, you're like, wow, that's not a team that's just way better than us. And then, it's like guaranteed loss for us. It's a team that we can compete with. And then we are making these frustrating mistakes. And so I feel like we can at least take away that we're kind of up to that like possibility of competing and that like baseline. And if Core's like, oh yeah, we remember to use our hands this time, then like I can totally see the actual victories coming through. You know, I feel like we're actually like on the same field. We're just messing up some key moments, you know.
Yeah, and I will say from the EU perspective, just like
go ahead.
This is the one time that I've heard an NA team praised in a way that's not like, oh, they might be a threat, right? I think like C9 is the only other team that like has ever gotten that kind of credence. And usually if a team is getting that credit, it's because of European players, right? More often than not, that people are going to give them that respect. But I think that like TL has been obviously in like the top team EU scrim bubble, whatever, since MSI this year, and this is a team that I think has earned and gotten that respect. And it's, to me, like, well, I understand your perspective, Meteos. You don't want to get on the roller coaster. You don't want the highs and lows. You just want, like, you want to sit in the middle and not have to. Yeah, he's been hurt. You don't want to engage anymore. I get it. But, like, I think not that what NA fans need is validation from an EU rep, but, like, this is a team that I think is the real deal. And I think that, I think that this team is genuinely very good. And I think that, like, if the West was ever one conglomerate, like, the two teams we would send would be G2 and TL. And I would put TL above any other LEC team at this point, right? Like they play the map well. I think Yone is so good. I think Yone might and probably is the best Lucian in the West, which is a crazy thing to say. Like, you want to give someone best Jinx in another region, no one cares, but like best player on one of the most mechanical ADs in the game ever is like, feels bad for me to give away from EU, but like this is a guy who's not afraid to step up. Smurf. Yeah.
They've definitely been really good. I think for me, going kind of off what you were talking about with Madden scrims is something that I think we've seen so many times at international events, where I think leading up to the event itself, these teams actually just get beat down in scrims so badly that they kind of forget how to play the game, you know, and they forget what it's like to win a game. Because one thing that kind of stands out to me is, you know, certain terms get thrown around a lot, like, you know, being proactive versus reactive, whatever. And it's kind of just like empty phrases a lot of the time. But one thing I've noticed is that when you watch like the top seeded LCK or LPL teams play, you know, they play to pressure side lanes a lot. And usually when they get picked on the side lane, they don't kind of panic, right? They either immediately push every other lane and just get some bigger advantage than, like, you know, they got from the pick, or they'll be ready to collapse in time. But what really sucks to see is when you see like a lot of the Western teams, they'll have someone get picked or even just caught when they're grouping or whatnot, and then they have this like really indecisive, chaotic fight that follows, where it's like, you know, oh, I don't want to let my guy die, so I'm not even going to push this wave. So now the cost of them all grouping and killing our guy should be that they're losing waves, objectives, camps, turrets, whatever. But instead, we're not even collecting that price from them, right? Like, we're just walking toward their play and sometimes even just throwing more bodies at them, just giving them more kills. So when I see like that kind of play, it's like, these guys know that's not good. And I feel like that just stems from losing way too many scrims that you just forget how to win.
Yeah, I feel like that's what you said is exactly the TL one where Impact got caught in side lane, right? And on Renekton, and all of TL kind of like funnel in late and try to bail it out and all end up dying.
I think that to me, it's more like it's maybe not. I won't speak to the scrims thing. Like you have more experience there than I do, right? But I think that when teams have been losing a lot, I feel like they have a less of like a zoomed out perspective of the game is the thing that I notice, and I think you see this a lot with Fnatic too, where it's like you can tell when they're having a more volatile day because plays that would normally not phase them, they'd be able to make the right decision in the moment, or games where they would be in your best game, you're setting up a minute ahead of time because you need to be back in base for like, let's say the 5 minute wave. So you can push the 5:30 wave. So you can be there at 6 for grubs. Like you can look at the game kind of in that detached way. But I think when teams are struggling, whether it's emotional or because of like scrims, the idea of forgetting how to win, like little things just shatter that perspective so much faster is kind of my interpretation of it. And you see teams, I think the term I've heard in scrims is like rage fight, where you just like feel like the only way you can get out of that situation is just like fighting your way out or picking a fight. The other classic is like you're scared to go side lane. Maybe you have a rookie player, so you just kind of reset your top and bot wave to neutral state, and you just start fucking A-ramming, hoping someone's gonna fight you, right? Like that's a classic.
It's so good you mentioned that with Fnatic as an example, because Fnatic's most recent game was that to the fullest. Oh my god, I was watching that with Sneaky, and it was just like, wow, Fnatic is really playing like emotionally right now. They had, what was it, one of the most scaling comps ever, like Cassante, Smolder, and they had some scaling bot lane as well. I don't remember what it was, but
I think they first picked Ziggs.
Jhin,
I don't remember.
I think it was
might have been
Jhin.
Oh yeah, it was Jhin
But-
Smolder. Oh,
Yeah, with Skarner. So they have this like really low damage scaling team comp, and they were forcing harder than I've ever seen someone force. And like some of the fights were kind of working early, but then they ended up having the fastest game at Worlds up till that point. Like just a quick 24-minute loss. They just actually, I remember there was a play where their opponents were hitting their top tier 2 turret. They're like, nope, this is illegal. Don't let them do it. They 5-man chased and just all died for actually nothing. It was just the craziest chain of events. So that's 100% something that we've been seeing. Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Is this where I got to complain about Fnatic? You guys, if you guys want that, okay. So I hate this team, and this is, you want to talk about the team where you never like you have this with your region, Meteos. I have this with one team, and that team's name is Fnatic. I cannot believe in good faith in this team because the worst thing in the world is at MSI, G2, TL. This is the team you have to be scared of. Fnatic are goated in scrims. They are so good. They are so lethal. I'm hearing TL, like G2 has a worse record against TL than Fnatic does. I hear TL cannot play the game against Fnatic. They're so good. And then every time they go on stage against TL or anybody else, they collapse. This is the most fragile team I have ever seen. They will show up 1 week, play at like their absolute best. Their ceilings are good. They have solid individual players. Not all the ceilings are the same, right? I think Humanoid, Razork, and Jun, very, very good. Noah and Oscar are more role players, even when they're at their best, right? But like, this is a team that on a dime will collapse. No idea why. The org is not willing to talk about this stuff in like great depth, so it's really hard to get like a satisfying answer. But this is a team that like, I feel so bad for the Fnatic fans, but for EU fans, it's just like, you cannot rely on this team to put a result up because you'll have a game one where it looks like, all right, it looks winnable. And then Jun will get caught and next game he'll just run it down. And you'll have a game where like if Humanoid and Razork are synced up that game, they'll look like the best mid jungle duo in the West. They'll look like they can take anybody out. Humanoid will look like a genius on side lanes. And then you'll come up to the games we saw most recently where it's like they're playing a scaling comp. He's flashing forward with Caulfield's Warhammer and a Kindle gem on a Sejuani at 300 health. Like he's going to do something. And like they're throwing like they're just playing atrociously. Like there's no world where that was a good play. And like you call it emotional. I don't know what emotion it was, but they're clearly just not in it. And I think that variance in performance is infuriating to watch. It is so frustrating because they've done good early games. They haven't stumbled into good macro in the early game. Like they've done it. It's been rehearsed. It's been successful. But then the next week, the next day, the next opponent, the next game in a series, it will just fall apart. And it makes me so upset.
So I'm assuming that then the tweet drama also made you even more worried for this team that is, quote unquote, so emotional, where He's tweeting about, oh yeah, our whole plan was to ban Yone, and then we didn't ban Yone, and then they have the like apology tweet. Sorry, I misunderstood the situation.
I don't want to go full in here because, the Fnatic, they're partnered with the LEC. I'm sure there's some platform where I can get more information, to give me context before I go on a public platform. But I'll say this is goofy as hell. And, this has been, they have gone through... They went through the ringer last year, and I was willing to give them a lot of, peace last year because they obviously were just struggling to find a roster that could work on stage. But this year, they've had the same roster. They've had these constant up and down performances. And it's clear that whether it's this particular cocktail of players, whether it's that obviously I don't want to speculate on anything psychological, but whatever it is, they're not able to perform, right? Something is missing here that allows these players to show up consistently. And it's not the same old scapegoats of the meta or the draft or somebody got sick. Although technically, yeah, a lot of players did get sick this year. So there were some inconsistencies because of that. You can't say that when it flips literally in the context of a single day, right? It is clearly how people are waking up on the day, personal feelings, personal levels of focus, whatever that is, and it makes it hard. And the org, credit to them, the second it gets to be anything about mental health or performance coaching, I'm always, it's I don't even know if I would want them to share, even if they did have that information, because I don't know if that's fair to the players, right? Yeah. All I know is that whatever the issue is, it's resulting in these wild inconsistencies on stage, and it's deeply unsatisfying to be a fan or follower of this team.
For what Kobe was saying, if you guys don't know what he was referring to, basically Jun did an interview where he said that the team prepped all their drafts the night before, and they decided they were going to ban away Yone from Cream. They weren't going to ever let him have it. And then at the last second, or there was impact ban or whatever, I think it was just at the last second type thing. They changed their mind and they let Yone through. So obviously was really frustrated about that and felt that was a big reason that they lost. Cream is obviously really good at those type of champions, so it is pretty spooky to give that over to him. And then he did come out with this apology for it, which everyone is then memeing is Fnatic in the room with you right now? Blink twice if you need help, all these memes because I made a mistake in my interview today, and I would like to apologize. I misunderstood the situation and misexpressed myself after the game because I was a bit frustrated. All is clear between us, and we learn from this. We focus on the next game. And it's just... So, it's definitely a bad look. But at the same... and I get why you would be frustrated. But at the same time, if you want to be on that org next year, and especially when you're still in the tournament, you shouldn't be publicly flaming your coach. You have to work with these people, right? I would be pissed too if my coach said we're going to ban Yone against Cream, and then we get in the game just kidding, we're not going to ban Yone against Cream, and then he just absolutely destroys our whole team on it. You're of course I'm mad. That was dumb as hell. But also, you don't then go flame your coach basically publicly in an interview and create inter-team drama on a team that already seems to have all these issues as far as regulating emotion and being stable and all this. It's Worlds is still going on. You're still in it, focus up.
Yeah, I feel like most players, I would probably say any pro player, especially here at Worlds, has gone through that situation where you have these sometimes multiple hour-long team meetings where you're just talking about draft, and especially with the case of Yone is earlier I was trying to remember have we ever had a champion this dominant that's just constantly being let through? I don't know.
Maybe Mordekaiser in that bruiser meta at Worlds.
But it was banned so much. I think the crazy thing here,
it's it's been 20 plus games or whatever of Yone first pick every game with a 90% win rate. And so if I'm a player and I'm on red side, I'm saying, hey, we should probably ban that. That shit is broken. Literally everybody's winning with it. And then, you go through all these possible scenarios and then you settle on it. Yeah, we're banning Yone. The next day, the coach comes in. So we're not banning Yone. I would be like, what? No, we are banning Yone. You can't stop me. I would reach over and grab the guy's mouse. But I do think publicly
you wouldn't be talking
saying
in an interview, but you would actively disrupt the process on stage. I like that.
Yeah. I at least we're not playing against Yone. I'll do what needs to be done. So I totally get it. That is super tilting. But at the same time, airing dirty laundry is never a good look. I would for sure flame my coach in private 100%. I'd be like, what the fuck? But nah, probably not a good thing for an interview.
Yeah, not a good indication of Fnatic's potential to recover in the context of this tournament. Because the thing is, I would love to tell you guys about like Fnatic's issues that aren't these issues, where I'm like, oh, this guy's not as good at this, you know. Are they going to, like, looking at them in the context of can they beat like a really truly great team? But we're not even getting to the starting line of having that discussion right now. Like, they can't even show up to play right now, and I think that's kind of the heartbreaker. And hope that this was just an honest mistake in an interview, right? And oopsie, maybe, I'm not sure. I didn't actually watch the interview. I just saw the quote, right? So I'm not sure if it was translated or if Jun.
It was a translated interview, I think, from Korean.
All right, well, I'm not going to give him as much of a pass. If he had spoke English, I was like, he has a free out. You know what I mean? Like, English is okay. English is getting better, but it's not perfect. But, you know, I just kind of hope that they can recover and show that, because as frustrating as they are, right, I think for all the players in the staff, they've worked hard all year, right? And you deserve a shot to at least show up and, like, show the best version of Fnatic, which still might not be enough to, you know, beat a LPL or LCK team in a best of 3, but it would be enough to at least place it. Yeah, and like, but it's enough to at least play a good series, right? And I think that, like, right now that's the most you can hope for. And if you manage to make the upset happen, then, like, we can, you know, one step at a time. But based on the nature of that last game, I don't have a lot of hope.
I think even to me, it's like I'm less stressed that, oh, you lost the top because they're really, really good and you gave over Yone. But I would be a little bit more concerned personally I felt like Gam was in some really good positions to beat Fnatic, right? Yeah. And that was a close game, and Fnatic did at a certain point pull it out and really start to pull away. But I think, you know, the first like 20, 25 minutes ish, like, you know, guesstimating about of the game, I remember being really close and being like, oh, Gam could actually win this. And so I think that's kind of spooky that then you have to go into this really tough opponent. TL obviously did get a really good draw. We got just about as good of a draw as we could get for the last 2 rounds, after obviously drawing Weibo in the second round was definitely unlucky. It was one of the hardest ones along with T1. But they've gotten pretty lucky, you know, kind of back-to-back draws. I will say I'm really sad with the draws overall. I felt like last year Swiss draws were a lot more interesting, and maybe it was just because we were getting more NA+EU and stuff, and that kind of like made me feel that way. But Mad's already out. You know, if Fnatic loses to Weibo, then or TL loses, then they obviously can't play each other. It's like there's not a lot of matchups remaining. You know, the expected result is Weibo beats Fnatic, right? And maybe they pull off the upset, and then there's opportunity there. But if Fnatic loses to Weibo, the only team left that any NA team could even play against from EU is G2. And G2, like, there's no guarantee of that matchup, and they might even beat T1, and then they beat through. So yeah, I've been kind of sad that we haven't actually gotten much of the kind of like regional rivalry type matchups.
Yeah, even though it was because they don't have to play TL now, you know, because you're thinking they would be in the same slot.
They dodged us.
Yeah, I had a similar feeling. You know, we were on the desk and we were watching the draw, and even though you're kind of looking at it on paper and you're like, oh, it's a good draw for TL's chances to move forward, I still felt a little like deflated, like, because I wanted, you know, either them versus Fnatic or the G2 FlyQuest one. Even I just wanted something now, so we could actually have, you know, our rivalry, and that it definitely is something that was really, I feel like, lucky last Worlds, but paid off in, you know, in such a big way, because we had multiple matchups and, you know, going both ways even. So yeah, I feel like,
I mean, we also, to be fair, had more teams, right? BDS was our 4 seed and you got all 3 seeds in, right? So
yeah,
we just had more presence. like we were just going to have better games, boys, because we just had 2 more teams in the running. We weren't losing slots to PSG and the CB law, right? So I think that like 2023 was always going to feel a little bit better in terms of the draw, because there was just way better potential for us to get either rivalry matches or LPL or LCK matches that could, you know, could potentially be an upset.
I mean, the draws have been weird. I mean, obviously G2 got a win against Weibo, which is really, really good for them. But, you know, even just looking at it from the TL perspective, it's like, I know some fans are kind of cheering for like the easiest possible matchup, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, imagine a world in which everyone's expecting FlyQuest to lose to HLE. We'll talk about FlyQuest later. But imagine a world in which FlyQuest loses to HLE and then TL beats GAM. And then it's like if TL were to beat FlyQuest and get to quarterfinals by beating GAM and Pain and FlyQuest, like, and then gets 3-0'd in quarters, like, is that a run that we're hyped about? You know what I mean? Like, it becomes this thing that everyone's just going to call a Mickey Mouse run, unless you're really competitive in the quarters. Then I think the kind of context changes about it. And so it's like, I want the interregional rivalries. Like, I would actually rather have our teams play against EU than I would against some of the minor regions, just like straight up, because I do think our teams have a good chance against Mad and Fnatic, and I think those are more exciting matchups by a lot. And it kind of gives both regions something to like banter about and cheer for. So I'm pretty bummed by the draws so far. Doesn't mean we won't get some really, really good ones later. But as far as like the NA and EU perspective, I think largely our teams have only been beating the minor regions and not playing each other, and then just losing the LCK and LPL. So like it hasn't really been that exciting, I think, as far as like the games from NA and EU perspective.
Yeah,
I'm also just
I liked Broken Blade's interview from the other day where he talked about, hoping for a lucky draw just is kind of, I don't remember exactly what his wording was, but he didn't really vibe with it. And I would agree with that as well, where I think that if you need a lucky draw to get far, like, or to get in the top 8, then it's kind of a fake achievement, like you were saying, Isaac, like a Mickey Mouse run, because if you're a really good team, you shouldn't worry about who you're playing. You'll just win either way, right? And if you can only win by getting lucky, then people will see that. So I've never been too bothered about draws, like when I'm playing or watching, because at the end of the day, the best team should win anyway.
I feel like my perspective is like if you're trying to avoid a specific matchup stylistically, like if you're trying to avoid one specific team that can just dunk on you, whether it's like because they have a player that outmatches or there's something that they do that you can struggle with, I think that's fine. But if it's just like we want to avoid all the hard teams, like I think that's really tough. And that's why I think that like if for EU, for example, like the H2K run where they draw Albus, Nox, Luna, like I look back at that group stage and I'm like, hell yeah, H2K. But I look back at like them making it to semis, and that feels like the clear example of the Mickey Mouse run, right? Like good on Albus, Nox, Luna for making it out, good on H2K for making it out, but like that semis, I don't know how the players from that roster feel about it, but I look back at it from an EU perspective, I'm like, it doesn't stack up to other years where there have been close series against stronger representatives, right? The final placement doesn't matter to me nearly as much as like actually just playing an incredible series. Like I would rather G2 go out losing a best of 5 where they look like they can really beat the best team in the world than like make finals and get 3-0'd again, personally.
Well, let's actually get into some of those matchups that are coming up, because there's a bunch of them to actually hit on, with all 6 being drawn. And I feel like the EU ones are actually more exciting than the NA ones that were drawn. We've been talking about the TL GAM one a decent amount. I think it's probably because most people are leaning towards TL, but with the shakiness they've shown, maybe not so secure. And then the FlyQuest one versus HLE, I feel like pretty much everybody is like, well, HLE should be able to wrap that one up. But the EU draw of G2 versus T1, even though I personally wanted them versus FlyQuest, G2 versus T1 is actually one of the international rivalries that we have the most history with, because they keep on getting these draws and keep on matching up. So, that one I feel like is super hype. Maybe people are definitely a bit down on Fnatic right now and expecting the Weibo win for that one. But I think a lot of EU fans are probably hyped up for the T1 draw at least.
If you had told me at the start of this tournament that G2 drew T1, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's do it. You tell me now, and I'm less like, even though they just beat Weibo, T1 actually look really good. Like T1's early game looks incredible, and some of like obviously I think that they had like. Some of the games their opponents, I think, looked a little dizzy and clearly weren't ready to keep up. But it is like it's BLG. Like if anyone can keep up, surely BLG can keep up. And they've got their own issues. Don't get me wrong, but like this version of T1 looks really good. I think they probably should have won if they understood Aurora better and probably had more respect for Aura and pick ban. Like if you just pretend that's any other top laner, I think they win that first game. It was pretty much solo Aurora ults, I think, that stopped T1 from winning that first game versus TES. And this is a team that, like, I kind of hate it because how can they keep doing this where they just like show up and pop off at Worlds? And I don't think that it's like Faker suddenly the GOAT, right? I still think Faker isn't like necessarily having the best performances, but like you look at the way that like Zeus and Guma are grouping up and taking plates, the way that they're building early leads, the way that they're playing fights, like this team is back to being on a tear in such a small turnaround from what was like the shakiest Worlds qualification, right? Very different team in such a small span of time. And while I do think G2 can win, like this is not the easy draw that it would have been or that I would have assumed it would be coming into the start of this tournament.
And part of the reason why a lot of people were giving T1 a bit of a boost coming into this tournament is both because of history at international events, but also because of meta change and people expecting it to be good for Faker because the AD carry meta was not good for Faker. And, you know, that actually was quite true. You know, his Silas was good, the Yone, and then picked Nico. So I feel like that full direction change is good for them. And Carrier got 2 range supports as well, with him having a Nico game also and the Renata game. So I feel like a lot of the things that people are looking at with T1 where you know and you're used to seeing them at their best with Carrier on some like range, lane dominant, you know, aggressive bottom lanes for them, and Faker on like some more playmakers than like the AD carry meta that had been ruling for so long. So but that in addition to improvement in play is like everyone's just ready to embrace the hype for T1 again as usual.
Yeah, I mean they've been looking definitely way better than expected, right? And it's definitely history that gives them some of an edge because again, Faker is his 7th Worlds. He's never missed semis, so I mean that's pretty insane. And then as soon as they come and they look good in one game, you're like, okay, all right, I guess T1's just the GOATs again. And I mean, especially taking down BLG was pretty exciting. For me though, like I actually really agree with Kobe. I wasn't looking at this as like, oh, that's a good draw because that's an exciting draw because it's so easy for G2. I just think it's a banger mashup, right?
Yeah, it's a banger. I just wanted to be clear, like 3 weeks ago, if you'd shown me this, I would have been convinced this was a freebie. Yeah, because they were rough qualifying. It's not a freebie, boys. It's very scary. It's very close, and I'm nervous because the most recent tape we have when G2 were successful against T1 was like 3 brand new unique picks that T1 weren't ready for. And then the second time they played, they just banned those 3 picks, Poppy, Rek'Sai, and Zach, and G2 instantly fell apart, right? And I think that G2 have grown, but like when they don't have Yone, when anyone doesn't have Yone, it becomes hard to mount comebacks. And I think their early game is still shaky. I think their map and macro game was incredible, right? Against Weibo. It's part of the big reason, part of why they won. Their side lane control was way better.
It's really good.
Yeah, but T1 looking good in the early game against a G2 who has continued to make these little mistakes is a very terrifying prospect. Like I think this will be one of the best games of this draw for sure in terms of parity. But I'm over here sweating, boys, because I'm
worried for Yike versus Owner, to be honest, because I feel like Owner was going Super Saiyan and Yike is not going Super Saiyan.
Yike is not going Super Saiyan. That Nocturne game was shaky.
Yeah. Yike's that farmer with the shotgun at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, okay, all right. I mean, give him Krillin, dude. Don't do him that dirty.
I mean, he has not been playing as well this year. I think he's definitely been having a down year. He's been kind of struggling. I do think that the G2 solo lanes have been looking really, really strong. Like BB in the last series was a monster on the Galio game. I think that Caps has been sideline really, really well. Even in their loss, obviously, he was such a big threat, and like that was like a pretty close to winnable game, right? And he was such a big reason, I think, for that. Playing through sides on Yone really, really well. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that it'll be a competitive series and that it'll be a really, really exciting series. But Owner has just been so good, I think, and Yike has looked like a pretty big weak point for G2. All right, well, before we move on to anything else, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this.
Hello?
Bro, why are you parking?
Seriously. What is that?
Remote smart parking assist. You could have parked anywhere.
They could have parked there. They could have parked there. They could have parked there.
Welcome back to The Dive, driven by Kia. We are talking Worlds. We're talking the Swiss stage here. And we haven't really talked about FlyQuest yet. So let's talk a little bit about FlyQuest. Obviously, they're sitting in a pretty good position. They are 2-1. But I think people aren't as hyped because they haven't had a big win yet as far as like over a big opponent. You know, they did get obviously a really good first draw because they're #1 seed. And then they were able to beat, another minor region team. And so like that's how they've kind of gotten to this point. Their first match was
HLE.
what was their first match?
Oh, I'm just
First
looking.
match was GAM.
All that's in my head though is that
don't
they have
think
to play
so.
HLE.
Oh yeah, they beat GAM and then they lost to DK and then they beat PSG.
PSG yesterday.
PSG is a good team, and that was actually I was happy about that because I think PSG is legit good. And then now they are going to be playing HLE. I will say my big kind of like negative has been I don't think Bwipo is playing well at all. Bwipo was a question mark for me coming into Worlds, and I've been pretty vocal about that. Like I didn't know how he was going to play. I thought he played way better in playoffs than he did in the regular season for FlyQuest. I feel like Bwipo has been rough. His Darius game, I feel like to be fair, it wasn't just the Darius, but like I just thought it was like the draft itself seemed so countered by a lane swap, and then of course they got lane swapped on, so like that didn't really work at all, and the Darius was kind of rough. His last Renekton game against PSG, he had some really cool big moments later where he's soaking so many cooldowns and using Sterix well and like doing things really, really well. But I also feel like he put himself into kind of a tough position early, like getting killed in kind of silly spots and I think overextending at times and kind of getting it with like 1 HP or something, but that felt more like luck than skill. And I do think, he like had that really, really good Scion game, but I felt like he was a really big liability on the Darius, and I felt like his early game was really rough against PSG. And to me, like the big positive kind of has been the bot lane. I feel like the bot lane is playing, really, really well. I thought Masu has been smurfing. I think Busio has been solid. I think Quad and Inspired are doing well, but Inspired's Mumu game, I felt like also when they were playing against a good opponent, he was just like legit power farming and not actually covering any threatened dives, and his laners were getting like zoned off waves and stuff, and he's just literally doing nothing but farming camps. I think he team fights really well. His Ivern was good and all that, but like, yeah, I guess for me the biggest like expectation versus reality thing, most positive, has been probably around the bot lane. So I feel like they've actually played quite well.
Have we really only beat minor regions so far?
Yep.
Both of our teams?
I mean, we haven't.
Oh, man.
We haven't played EU, and we've lost all our games to LPL and LCK.
I would say
Dang,
though,
it sounds better when you don't look at it like that.
I
Just
would
saying
say,
2-1
though,
sounds way better.
Yeah.
PSG, they were looking at the stats, and PSG has it is about a 50% win rate versus EU and NA teams.
They're good
over the last couple of years, and so those are all top seed EU and NA teams, top couple of seeds, and so I feel like we're at the point where like PSG should be, even though it's technically like minor or smaller region, like that they're on tier with our like top tier teams. So I feel like each victory against them is definitely not one of those like assured things, and I think is it's not like beating a LPL or LCK, but is an accomplishment.
I put them on the same. I think obviously what sucks is it doesn't have the same like regional pride association, which I think diminishes the impact for fans a lot. But in terms of like actual caliber of team, PSG specifically, not really the PCS as a whole region, sadly, it has always been incredibly top heavy. But this team specifically is on par. Absolutely could compete against any of our teams on any given day.
I mean, they spanked Mad in the last game they played.
Oh yeah, super duper. And I think Mad, I think that could have been closer. Like I think Mad made a lot of mistakes, but like they earned that win. I'm not going to say like they didn't. And I think PSG are a very good team. They're a good macro team. They really take a lot of inspiration from the LCK.
FlyQuest MSI too.
Yeah, like they're a good team. And I think that was the first like real victory for FlyQuest where it felt like, hey, they were tested. I think obviously they kind of outscaled with their composition, but PSG had that game in winning positions for quite a decent amount of time, and like the fact that FlyQuest held on, weathered that storm, and found their angles, and was able to play the kind of style that Inspired talks about, where they're able to, bait people in, and kind of like in this case it was Bwipo who was kind of the carrot, right, to kind of bring them in, and they kind of use all their cooldowns on this Renekton as you talked about before they then punish with this Kai'Sa, with this composition that's really set up to do that. I thought was good, a good indicator of things to come when you obviously don't take into account the early game where Bwipo was the carrot, but there was no counter punch. He was just jumping in for not as many good reasons.
I actually even want to say, like, I thought Bwipo's team fighting was super questionable that game, because even once FlyQuest, it seemed like they were just completely in control of the game. He was baiting, but like he wasn't baiting for much. He was going so deep. I remember there was that one play where they were like pushing tier 2 mid, and I think he did something wild, like TP'd on a minion that was like almost dead. Their wave was still kind of far, and then he went in so aggressively into a point where like there's really nothing good that can come from this situation. He got bailed out by Iron Shields and Redemption, I think, but I don't know. A lot of his late game team fights seemed like he just kind of lost track of where his team actually was and was just going way, way too deep. Like even on the tier 3, I remember him doing something similar. So yeah, I would have to agree that his games have been a bit shaky for sure. Yeah,
I think the struggle of Bwipo, and I think Hill is saying, yeah, they're very similar players and they share a lot of like kind of the mindset about League, is that they're players who want to play for like the smallest micro things, but oftentimes when you get to like the pro level, and especially when you get to international, it's hard to communicate those things really deep in the moment, and it kind of requires this underlying trust and this assumption that like everyone's going to follow or do exactly what you need them to do. And it also doesn't leave a lot of room for underperformance. Like if you're having an off day, you have to like really be aware of your own ability to recognize those moments. And it's why I think both those players are so volatile, is like they're willing to push to the absolute limit, where they're willing to bet their life on a play that they think is good, right? They're willing to take big gambles on like small plays because they really believe that like if things go the way they see them, like things will work out. The downside is I don't think that they're always the best at taking into account how their team is going to react, whether or not they have that trust, and also like their own individual levels on any given day. And it just means that when it's good, it's really good, and when it's bad, it's like it looks foolish and it looks out of control. And I think Bwipo's in this portion right now where he's taking these risks, and I know that if we sat him down right now, he could he would rationalize 80% of them, and it would kind of sound good, right? But it's not working. And I think that there has to be, if you want to play this style where you push everything, like everyone has to be on the same page, and you can't consistently be doing this when the team literally isn't in a position to support you, because I think it just ends up costing way more than the theoretical benefits. And at some point, like I would never want to put Bwipo or Hylissang in a position where they can't be that kind of player, but sometimes you just don't need that player. And right now I don't think FlyQuest need Bwipo to be like, the madman or the guy who's going to play for these 5% leads or these 5% advantages when Masu is playing so well. I think they just need someone who's going to be a bit more stable, even though, as we highlighted, some of the baits were bad, but some of the baits were really good, right? He did create a lot of space. He did give a team comp that was quite short range, a lot of angles to like actually take objectives. And I don't know how you take the bad out of that and still get the good, but that seems to be like the eternal struggle for Bwipo, and as a result, kind of probably the eternal struggle for FlyQuest as well.
Does anyone I think they have an angle against HLE, or is everyone kind of resigned? Because I'm 100% on I'm 100% on the bottom lane hype train. I feel like especially our AD carries, both Masu and Yone, have been the ones like really performing and really putting in the work to carry. So I'm actually really excited, especially because both of them are NA AD carries, and both of them are fairly young and have so I feel like our future is looking pretty good. But back to focus on the match that is ahead of them, even though it is very difficult and pretty much everybody is going to be expecting them to lose to HLE. I do think that biggest thing in the match is probably trying to get some consistency for Whipple. Maybe that is in lane swapping, because FlyQuest really did embrace lane swaps and feel like they're very good at them. But then I remember the Darius game where it wasn't the first rotation of lane swaps. It was on the second one where he then was going back to lane, and as soon as he saw like two of them, and then he ghosted straight at that brush, and then got put really hard in a hole after dying in that spot. It made the game really hard. And like versus this team, HLE, we saw that you have to keep up 100% focus the whole game. We can't have, even if you do part of it good, we can't have these one moments where a big mistake is going to set you behind. Because like Gen G versus them had to keep the pressure on 100% the entire time. It's like, oh my god, macro, they're controlling all these objectives, and even then when they're behind, it's like boom, one big team fight. Delight slams them with a wombo combo, and then they're able to still win. And so I feel like everybody's nervous, but we got to craft the angles.
I think if I was FlyQuest coach, what I would look for is, if we can get Whipple under Nectin, that's always good. I think he will probably perform on the champ. I think it's best case. But another thing that I would probably try to go into HLE is like, teams are probably catching on to it by now, but like this Nocturne Orianna combo has been so insane at Worlds thus far. I think that Yone is kind of in a tier on his own. I would hope most people aren't going to be giving Yone for the rest of the tournament.
Especially
so I think that if Yone's off the table,
I was gonna say, if you give
especially not
Yone,
Zeka,
like,
if we give Yone
if we give it to Zeka, we don't
home.
deserve to win.
I think we investigate.
Just call it.
we look for some match fixing going on. But assuming that doesn't happen, I think if you get the Ori Nocturne combo, it's what Gen G played 3 games of Nocturne against HLE, and they were able to win with it. And I think that champion is kind of the great equalizer when it comes to playing against teams that are maybe better than you, because what a lot of the times these teams are good at is vision control, and they'll have like all these angles for the fight. They'll see you coming from anywhere, but you Nocturne ult, and all of a sudden all their wards are disabled, their vision's not shared. It kind of creates chaos for the team that's getting Nocturne ulted. And so that, like, with the Orianna combo, just looks so incredibly unfair to play against. Like, I don't even think you can dodge the Ori ult. I think it's a guaranteed hit from like 3,000 units away or something just absurd. So I totally want to see that. And then for bot lane, like you guys were mentioning, Masu and BLG 2 have both been playing really well. I think the standout picks bot lane for me have been like Kalista and Kai'Sa. They just seem incredibly strong. So I think getting some combination of a draft like that could actually give FlyQuest a chance to win. It's a best of 3, so like being able to beat HLE twice is absolutely a monstrous task, but maybe with a good draft and a good day, they could do it.
And I mean, honestly, even if they lose to HLE, but they're competitive, I'm gonna feel decent about their chances going into the 2-2 round, right? Like that. Like if you can be competitive, then that's really exciting to me. I was literally gonna say Nocturne Orianna as well, because it is looking so broken. As long as you time it well, you can't even flash it. You can't E it. You can't do anything because the Nocturne follows through. If you flash after the Nocturne ult lands, you're already shockwaved. Like it's actually crazy how much damage lands. So I was gonna say that
it's getting nerfed. It's gonna get nerfed for sure.
For sure
That combo is so unfair.
It's absolutely unfair. There's not actually any avoiding it. The other angle I would say is like if they can't get Renekton and like Ori Nocturne and just like play like standard with all their kind of comfort picks, I just say pick Sion and lane swap and try to play like Sion and lane swap. Try to do that sort of style where like Bobo I think does really know how to play out those situations. I think he's quite strong on the champion. I've actually watched him play a lot of Champions Queue, and I think Sion is some of his strongest games. He had a really, really good Sion game in their first game as well. And I think it's kind of hoping. I mean, it's a very, a skewed matchup, right? Like, let's just be honest. HLE are incredibly good, and should be able to out team fight, should be able to get advantages in the early game, should be able to play the map better. Like they should just have the edge. But I think you have to come for compositional advantages, right? Like you get an edge through a really strong team fight comp, or you. If you can get Ivern, you can go heavy scaling and hope that they can hold on and like capitalize on a mistake and kind of win out that way. But I'm just hoping that they can be competitive, and if they can win a game, I'll be really happy. If they can win the series, I'd be ecstatic. but definitely not really expecting anything because HLE is exceptionally good. I mean, they're one of the favorites to win the whole tournament.
I will say that I think the depth of champion pools that like obviously FlyQuest are willing to bring out, like I think helps them a lot, to your point, because I do think that you're not going to beat a good Korean team like playing the map and playing standard. They're just better at it than any Western team will ever be. And you even see that like the LPL doesn't even usually beat them at it. The LPL is like Korean teams go grubs every single game and they win going grubs every single game, fighting for spawn, setting up for spawn. LPL teams much more willing to play the entire map, right? Like, and when LPL teams win, it's not because they contest Korean teams at playing a more rigid style of League of Legends where they're willing to sacrifice gold for position on objective. It's because they're willing to play for side lane gold instead, or they're willing to play for something else. And so I think for when I look at FlyQuest, like the way that they win is if they're ever in a situation where Bwipo can pick Sion and there's a Jhin on the enemy team, like a lot of compositions in the meta that we're seeing, and we do see this more. I think LPL teams have some weird reads on draft. Like there's a lot of these Jhin compositions where like you just straight up don't do damage if you fall behind at all, or if you get to like the 3-item point in the game, right? Because of and I get why the static rapid fire build is good, but I personally hate it. There's so many comps that just run out of damage or don't have enough effective damage, right? And there's so many situations where you have like this Jhin Ahri plus something where if you're not able to keep that pressure on, and if FlyQuest do give themselves tools to like come back in a game or to force 5v5s against comps that aren't really built to win out on that without like a pick to start, like there is an angle. But I think the struggle is, as we saw in the G2 games and in the TL games, right, against LCK or LPL teams, is like it takes one screw up to throw an entire game away against these teams. Like they are very good at punishing. Their objective setup is also usually better. So half the time when you think you're taking a good fight, like, or when like it looks like to the average audience member they're taking a good fight, like if you're peeking at the side lanes, like we're taking a fight that's already slightly stacked against us because more often than not, LPL or LCK teams have their side lanes in a better position. And it's just so difficult because what looks like if you're just focused on the fight, like this 50-50 fight, like we're already spending 600 gold to try to just fight on even terms in a lot of these games. So I think it's such a tall task in the context of a best of 3. But like you said, I really just hope that they can show up and show a good game and maybe show us something new as well. Like as much as I like Nocturne Orianna, I would love for this Worlds meta to develop a little bit more before it settles, because the Nocturne Ahri like Aurora thing, like all that stuff is super cool, but like give me like 1 or 2 more layers and I think it'll be a super cool Worlds meta. For now I'm just happy that Yone is gone, but I would love a little bit more development, a little bit more like cooking, especially from
what do you mean
teams
gone?
that have
It was
that.
in
He's
all
not
3
gone yet,
games,
and people
that
are
your
still
team
happy
just
to
played
leave.
He's
today.
gone. No, those teams are. That's why some of those teams go home now, is because they don't understand that. Everyone has learned. We've all learned. No Yone.
Guess we'll see.
I'm gonna lose my mind if anyone in any LCK, or if it goes through again, I'm gonna be so upset.
It's going to go through again. So prepare yourself.
If they trade it for Aurora, I'll humor it. Mostly because I don't understand Aurora well enough, but obviously she's very broken. So I'm willing to concede that probably like you could outvalue there. Any other champ, it's just not possible to outvalue Yone. He's so good.
The other thing I think we should touch on a little bit is kind of some of the surprising results from the LPL teams. Both BLG and LNG, pretty surprising for very different reasons. I think people's expectations for LNG were kind of more up in the air. They didn't know if they were going to have Ike out here, and people were kind of like less sure about how they would be able to perform at Worlds compared to, you know, a Top or a BLG or an HLE or a Genji or whatever. But they were our first team through. They went 3-0, including a win over BLG. And then BLG followed that up by also losing to T1. And now they are, you know, in a spot where it's like this team could actually just be out at 1-3, which is, you know, pretty terrifying to think. You know, obviously it's not the expectation. They're obviously heavily favored over PSG, but I don't think anyone was really expecting that they would be in this situation in the first place. I think they were the team that I predicted for the 3-0 in this stage. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like partially I think other teams are playing better, but they're also just not looking nearly as bulletproof.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of it is because they're just best of ones. And like you're saying, these are the two teams that beat them, LNG and T1, are both playing better. And I feel like really benefit from the meta too. Seems like both of them have really good grasp on the meta. I guess we go LNG the first with it as far as the positives go. And since we were just talking about the Aurora, like really good, are really frequent bans for that, as well as the Yone. And I just like the teams that have also been able to incorporate like good Silas angles. It feels like there is a lot more room for the teams that have these really deep, flexible between melee / range, AP / AD mid laners, finding huge benefits in this tournament. And so, looking down the line, that's why I'm also super worried still about TL and APA not playing Yone and then them banning it on blue side, but that's neither here nor there.
Let's talk about BLG and LNG.
Yeah.
The real reason
Yeah.
is I'm worried about APA.
As soon as you guys were talking about the Yone bans and it being gone, it just triggered me again, and I was like, well, we had
Kobe's
to
over
ban it
here
on
just
blue
pouring
side.
sweat.
Yeah, I'll say that I think that BLG's drafts have been pretty terrible. Like, I think that the way the LPL teams have been using Jhin to me is so bad, because I think this is a champion that in like really good circumstances feels really powerful. And usually that circumstance is you have Yone or Rumble. And if you don't have one of those two champions, I think it is actually useless. Like, it's worse in swaps. It does so little upfront damage. It's so like not just useless in swap because it doesn't kill towers fast enough. It's bad in dives unless the circumstance is really good. And so that has been driving me crazy for a lot of this tournament, and BLG are big offenders of that. And like, if you look at their T1 draft, I really like Jhin and Ahri together. Like, that I'm really happy with. But then when you have this like Skarner, Jax, Poppy, it's like you end up in these situations in fights where you just don't have reliable damage or reliable target access. And this like whole like, oh, we've got this beefy frontline thing, usually means like you're not getting through enemy frontline fast enough, I feel like, with this Ahri Jhin combo. And unless you're finding a pick, we've seen like so many different versions of this composition just fall behind in games and like really not have the tools to fight. There have been some, I think, uncharacteristic missteps. Like, obviously Ben had that really hype solo kill, but then I think had some really questionable team fights following. But overall, I think that your point about BLG's like the meta reads being off really lines up for me, because it's not like there's still been some really great individual plays, but it often just feels like they're unable to do nearly as much as other teams. And even LNG, who I think are like great, I think the difference in their meta read is Yone. Like, they had that one, like TL had that one game they kind of threw. Then they had the Yone game where they should have been dead to rights, but I think their comp actually carried them through that, and Hong's Poppy. Like, Hong had a really good Poppy game. A couple of those ultimates were absolutely game changing. But like, I look back on that game now. When I first looked at it, I was like, wow, Scout's so good. I look back on it now, I'm like, actually, I don't think Scout did crazy well. Zika's popping off. Hong had a good Poppy game. And then the DK series, like, that was a troll ass series. I can't give LNG too much credit. I feel like DK were clowning in that second game. And
you
so
mentioned
LNG,
Zika. Like, you should give Zika credit for that series.
No,
like, Zika mega gapped.
Zika mega gapped in that last game, but like, we were on desk for that series, and we watched a team fight where like, if DK had any damage at all, if they had not drafted double AP with no other source of damage,
That was the
10
worst draft
seconds
of the
hard-
entire tournament.
Yeah, worst draft of the entire
by
tournament. By far. So I don't want to take too much away from LNG, but I think like for me, that best of five for LNG will be so important to decide, like, was this a little bit of a better meta read and some fortunate game states / draws that worked out in your favor?
Don't want to take too much away, but let me take the soul away real quick.
No, I'm taking, yeah, or are you like really here to upset it all? Because I look back on that and like, it's 50-50 for me, and I think that like, they were in a couple good situations. They came back a couple times, but like, I'm not ready to board the LNG hype train. And for BLG, if they come in with a slightly different approach to draft, I want to see how much better they would be, because I still feel like they have really good individual components. I don't think this is like complete free fall collapse. I just think that there were so many situations where the game became really unplayable because they didn't really just have the tools they needed to fight their way back, which is often like what they had to do domestically, right? When they would fall behind is find these big fights. I just don't think that they really set themselves up to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying about meta definitely lines up. I mean, a lot of the LPL's wins have been in games where they're playing Kai'Sa. A lot of their losses have been with Jhin. So, yeah, I feel like Jhin, absolutely, he's more of like a support enabler style champ. So maybe if you're playing really hard topside, he can work out. But even then, like you mentioned, lane swaps, he usually gets disadvantaged there. And just what's being played elsewhere, it's kind of the best AD carries look really, really strong right now. So if you're picking something other than that, then, you know, you're going to have to find some alternative way to win, which, you know, has been Yone for a lot of the games, maybe Aurora, but outside of that, not sure.
Yeah, it is tough. Like, the AD carry meta feels a little bit weird because a lot of the traditional hyper carry ones that I think people are talking a lot about Jinx, right? Like, coming into this tournament, actually just a lot of the meta reads and predictions that people have all been wrong, right? People were saying there was going to be no AD carries meta mid. Like, there's actually been a decent mid of Smolder, and we even saw some Tristana stuff earlier, though that's kind of fallen away largely. Rumble, everyone was expecting was dead because it got pretty significant nerf. That has actually been probably the most popular top laner of the entire tournament. You know, there's been some of these things where it was like people were kind of thinking it was going to be Syndra, like Syndra absolute S tier, and it's going to be there every time. People were talking about Jinx a lot, how Jinx is going to be S tier and like really heavily contested. A lot of the predictions have all kind of been wrong, and it's largely been like old meta with like a few kind of additions. So it's kind of interesting because I feel like for AD carries, it feels like the pool is kind of limited, at least of what people actually want to play. And there's such heavy dive comps that are being drafted. Like, you know, we're seeing lots of Yone, we're seeing Akali, we're seeing this Orianna Nocturne combo, we're seeing like actually a lot of even 4 melee comps that are being drafted. And so you want something that has some sort of safety and some sort of mobility, and that kind of limits a lot of the options, I feel like. And then often ADs are getting drafted second round, and so like AD bans will get thrown out, like Ezreal or Kaisa or whatever will get banned, and then the options start to become a little bit limited. So it's kind of interesting because I'm not really sure what the like real solution is. I kind of feel like maybe you could go towards some of the hyper carries and bring more enchanters in again, but teams seem very hesitant to play Renata. Like, no one's going to play Janna, even though I think, like, versus some of these, like, 4 melee comps, I actually think Janna could be really strong. But, yeah, it's interesting. I just wonder if there's going to be that next evolution, right? Like, even champions like Swain. Swain is insane into these, like, hard engage 4 melee comps. I feel like Swain can be really, really strong and has in the past come out at times like that. So I just wonder if there is going to be that, like, next stage of evolution, or if everyone's just kind of, at least for the Swiss stage, just going to kind of be defaulting to what has become popular.
Yeah, I feel like as far as mid lane, like the addition of Orianna and Ahri, like those are like feel really solid, and give you some extra flexibility there too. When you're talking about like enchanters and stuff, Ivern, honestly, like the jungle option for enchanters seems
jungle Janna.
Yeah, it's exactly. That to me seems like the best enchanter option right now, since teams are so used to playing with engage supports. It seems hard to sacrifice your engaged position there because we also have so many really good players that are exceptional at playing that style. Plus, then it introduces some like different weird roam timings and stuff as well, kind of like shifts everything around. Your vision acquisition then becomes way different too if your support is an enchanter. But traditionally, as Worlds goes on, and especially as we get past the Swiss stage, then we do start to see like the final twists of the meta emerge. And I feel like by no means is meta like figured out now. So it's definitely something I'm looking forward to and keeping my eyes open. And you mentioned especially like being flexible to some of these very short range full melee comps and full dive comps. We already see a bit of Galio, which is kind of like Swain, the big AoE disengage. There's some good, like real good, I feel like red side full counter pick options available. And that's why I like some of the teams that are going into it early already, and some of like Silas angles with really good ults to steal. Go ahead.
I mean, another one is Renata, who's kind of like a pseudo enchanter. She kind of is the midpoint between an enchanter and not really an engaged support, but she's got good disengage with the ult. We've seen some of her, and she's looked pretty solid. So I would expect to see more of that, especially with Kalista.
I think this is why it's awkward to be like in the position of a Genji or an LNG. I think that there is something to be said for having more stage games. Like obviously you're through and you're going to have scrims, but like when what you're doing is already working, you're not going to have that same need to like critically reevaluate. And I do agree that I don't think the meta is figured out at all. Like everything there's clearly not one best strategy. And to the point, and I don't remember who said it earlier, it might have been you, Isaac, about like there's so many short range comps, and there's so few reliable long range engage tools. And that already shows me that like something is off, because we've seen a lot of games, Gen.G HLE game, right? Like where like maybe it was just the first Gen G game. Yeah, it was the first Gen G game. I think it was against Weibo. Yeah, Kashahu played Lucian mid, where there's just no engage in the game. Almost none. And the game goes really long because neither team can like force a fight. And that I just feel like shouldn't happen. And to me is a clear indicator that like teams clearly just are on very different pages when it comes to the meta overall. And I'm hoping for that, the classic Worlds meta evolution. I think Renata is a good shout out as like the conservative enchanter choice. The Lucian Nami looked okay from TL as well. And the tidal wave and disengage tools, when there's not a lot of range, still feel like super, super impactful. But I think right now AD meta is the one where it feels like I think there's the least experimentation and potentially the most room for innovation, because Jhin is still so high priority, even though I don't think it's been effective, while Kai'Sa obviously is looking pretty damn strong, and Kalista as well. And I wonder how that shapes up, because for me, it's always a domino effect in meta, and the second any one role changes, it kind of demands a change everywhere else on the map, depending on how big it is. If it just ends up back to Kai'Sa Xayah, maybe not, but or Kai'Sa Kalista Ezreal, we're probably like nothing too crazy. But the second you start to add in hyper carries, like suddenly Bwipo gets to play Sion a whole hell of a lot more, and lane swaps seem a lot more, or can become a lot more one-sided when you have these champions that can actually push towers. So I'm hoping for that level of growth, because it does feel a little goofy right now. Like there's a lot of really awkward drafts. Like I don't want to be the guy who's like, oh, they lost this in draft. I feel like that's always the laziest analysis. But there's a lot of games where when you hit the mid game, you're like, what do they actually do? How do they actually do anything?
Yeah. I think the coolest draft of the whole tournament for me actually was the Game 3 Genji draft against Hanwha.
Twitch.
I actually absolutely love the Twitch angle there. I thought it was so good. And the way that they used Nocturne to basically enable the Twitch as though it were like a flanking Kennen or flanking Gnar or whatever, I thought was actually so smart. And then pairing that with Aurora as well, so it's like Nocturne turns off the lights, all of a sudden Aurora's coming in from some angle, drops down the ulti, you're all stuck in this circle and you don't know where Paze is, and then Twitch just opens up and it's just absolutely ramming your whole team from like 700-800 units, whatever it is, when the ulti range like 800 units away. And you can't actually see turn on this guy and kill him, right? Because it's like Twitch is pretty susceptible to that turn. If you can insta flash on him and kill him off, right? Like you have to kind of put yourself in these vulnerable angles. Because if Twitch opens up front to back, generally you can only hit the tanks, right? Like you need to be on a flank to be able to actually hit the priority targets. And I thought Aurora and Nocturne enabled that so well. And it was just like one of those drafts where a hyper carry really made sense, where it was executed incredibly well. And to me, that's what kind of made it my favorite draft of the whole event. And, it made me start thinking more about like, what are these angles? What should the next evolution be for ADs? Because I fully agree the meta is not solved by any means. But I also think that often teams do just kind of like default to doing the same thing during Swiss. And we often see the big evolutions coming in the next stage, once we get to quarters and once we get to semis and so on and so forth. But I'm just hoping that with these couple days off, with the fact that it's all BO3s for elimination or advancement, it's like, time is now. Like, you shouldn't be holding these picks. You should be looking for that edge, because the team that figures out the next evolution first could get themselves a quarterfinal spot off of it.
And it always starts in a small way, right? Like last year it was Caitlyn Lux. I want to say it was Weibo who brought it out first. And people are going to credit Keria for being the one who really pushed the meta forward after that. But like, I feel like all it takes is one team to see success on stage with something a little bit different to force everyone in the tournament to reevaluate their priorities, right? In terms of what, like, that Gen G game is a great example. Like people are going to start looking at like, is Nocturne Twitch a combo that can be replicated in other circumstances? Does it have to be this exact one? Do we have to have Paze on our team? Can anybody do this? The second you see that success,
doesn't hurt.
Like, doesn't hurt. Certainly doesn't hurt to have Paze or Canyon, right? Like, pretty good players, turns out. But all it takes is someone to find that success to force, I think. And certainly when that team's Gen G, obviously it helps accelerate that process. But if anyone does it and finds success in a big game, every team now is looking at that as like something that's actually real and needs to be practiced or at least prepared for.
Yeah, that credit to Lahens also, because they had the comms listen in, and he was like, "I told you you should play Twitch." He's always a very creative one, and yeah, that was one of my favorite drafts. But it's interesting because that is one that also comes back to Nocturne, and so at the end of the day, a lot of these things we're mentioning, like the linchpin that enables a lot of them, is Nocturne. where, you know, everyone's spamming like Nocturne Orianna or Nocturne with the Ahri or Nocturne with the Aurora or Nocturne with the Twitch. And no other champion does these vision games for you. So yeah, we might get to an area where like Nocturne bans start to become a thing if everybody's trying to get really creative with vision plays. But
yeah, someone out there
super
who has
fun.
too much free time, go back through all the metas where Nocturne has been good and figure out what the counters were, so we don't have to prep as much. Just send that to us real quick, so we can we could beat one. Because I'm sure that Nocturne's been good before, and I know that there have been answers. But right now, I could only think of him as an answer to when TF was good. I don't remember what people did when Nocturne was good on his own, outside of that context.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm trying to think. I mean, a lot of times his weaknesses are like early game invades and, you know, lack of ability to do much before 6. But, you know, in games where there's lane swaps every other game, there hasn't been a whole lot of pre-6 fighting. So I guess he's getting away with it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that if you just have a really aggressive team that plays to get prio, push in, just constantly invade Nocturne, take his camps, track him all the time, then, you know, you can definitely shut him down in that way.
I think it's a really good point because I do think it's a lot about pushing the pace, especially in the early game. Even once you get 6, Nocturne's ult is so friggin' long. Like the cooldown is like a, you know, what is it, 2-3 minutes at rank 1? Like it is super, super long. So if you can constantly push plays and stuff and get in his face and force him to use that ultimate, it's like you are not getting a lot done outside of those windows, right? So it does kind of really require that setup. So I think that could be the answer.
That's why they're rushing experimental hexplate now, even before boots and anything. Get that ultimate haste.
Fair enough. But I think that is pretty much going to do it for this episode of The Dive. Thank you so much, Drakos, for joining us, and Meteos for getting up bright and early to be able to do it over there in LA. We're going to have another episode after week 2 of Swiss, so we'll be previewing all the quarterfinals matchups for that. And we're going to keep trying to have some different guests from the other regions. We're not doing Dive for you this year. It is just The Dive driven by Kia, but we are going to be getting guests in from different places. And Drakos, I think, is going to join us for at least another episode, if not more. We'll see how all that goes. But it's been a lot of fun so far at Worlds. Hopefully, EU and NA, we're going to have more to be happy about for the next episode. We'll be talking about all our teams making it to quarters, how we're going to be getting to semis,
Life, how it happened,
absolutely slamming
God.
them, destroying them, dismantling them.
Masu just obliterated Viper. You're going to hear us say that maybe. Maybe not.
Probably.
Probably. Good odds. Good odds.
I'll
So,
say it even if it doesn't happen.
there you go. All right. Well, remember, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode of Dive. You can also check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you enjoy your podcast platforms. Make sure you send us your questions on Twitter using the hashtag TheDiveLOL. Worlds continues this Thursday, October 10th. It is 5 a.m. Pacific where it is starting, so bright and early. If you're living with Meteos, you can go watch with him. Where Top Esports is going to take on D+Kia, followed by Hanwha Life against FlyQuest. That's going to be at approximately 8 a.m. Of course, it depends on how the series do go. Make sure to tune in, and thanks for watching. We will see you next week.